What's up, everyone? Today we're talking about BC Bud, the cannabis economy that turned a Canadian province into the most profitable illegal market in North America. We're talking about billions of dollars, 20,000 grow houses, and the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. And the craziest part of this whole story, it was all created by accident. A DEA crackdown in the United States basically gave birth to the BC industry overnight. If you're new to this channel, I cover the history of cannabis, including the strains, the people, and the stories that made this whole industry what it is today. Hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. So the story starts in the early 1980s on a small island just north of Seattle, Washington. There was this grower known as the Indian. Nobody really knows his real name. Nobody knows if he's still alive today. But what he did changed cannabis forever. He was trying to solve a simple problem. How do you grow a really high quality cannabis indoors? At the time, most cannabis came from outdoor sativa plants. They were tall, slow, and impossible to hide. So he started working with Afghan indica genetics, plants that grew shorter, finished fast, and produced massive amounts of resin. After years of work, he created a strain called Northern Lights. This was a game changer. Northern Lights could be grown in a basement, finished in 8 weeks, and produce enough yield to make indoor growing actually profitable for the first time. Now let's talk about how it spread. In the mid-1980s, Northern Lights genetics made their way to Amsterdam. They ended up in the hands of a Dutch breeder named Nevil Schoenmakers. He had a seed company called the Seed Bank, and he was selling cannabis genetics through a mail-ordered catalog. Nevil refined Northern Lights and stabilized it even further. By 1989, his version was winning the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam, and the next year, it won again. Now check this out. Nevil's catalog was reaching about 15,000 North American growers. He was shipping seeds inside soup cans with lead inserts to fool the x-ray machines at the border. And some of those soup cans were reaching one specific place that would change everything: British Columbia. So how did British Columbia end up becoming the cannabis capital of North America? It really came down to three things. First, there was electricity. BC had cheap hydroelectric power thanks to all the dams built for forestry and the mining industries. And electricity is the biggest part of growing cannabis indoors. We're talking about 50 to 80% of operating cost. Second, geography. BC is massive. We're talking nearly 1 million square kilometers of mostly wilderness. Aerial surveillance was mostly impossible, and law enforcement was spread way too thin as it was. Third, there was the culture. By 2004, more than half of BC residents had tried cannabis at least once. That was the highest rate in Canada. Vancouver was openly tolerating cannabis use, and there were even cannabis coffee shops operating right out in the open. You take all of that and combine it with Northern Lights genetics arriving from Amsterdam, and you've got the perfect storm. Okay, we've laid the foundation. Now let's talk about when things really kicked off. October 26, 1989. The DEA launched something called Operation Green Merchant. In one day, federal agents raided hydroponic stores in 46 states. They arrested 119 people. Over the next few years, they shut down nearly 4,000 indoor grow operations in the United States. The DEA wanted to crush the American indoor cannabis industry, and they succeeded. But what they didn't see coming was that all that demand had to go somewhere. And it went right across the border to BC with its cheap power, easy genetics, and way less enforcement. So instead of killing indoor cannabis in North America, the DEA accidentally created a bigger cannabis economy. Let's talk about how big BC Bud actually got. By the late 1990s, BC was producing about 36% of all Canadian cannabis. The industry was worth around 2 billion Canadian dollars a year domestically. By 2010, BC was exporting between $4 and $8 billion worth of cannabis annually. And of course, most of that was going south to the United States. That's the same economic tier as softwood lumber, one of the province's biggest historic industries. Cannabis had basically become as important as the timber trade. And in 2008, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police estimated there were 20,000 grow operations in residential houses across the province. 20,000. Entire suburban neighborhoods had houses converted into grow rooms, walls torn out, lighting rigs installed, ventilation systems built into the attic. A single 3-bedroom house could generate $200,000 to $300,000 per year. This is where the Hells Angels come into the picture. The DEA put out an official report in 2000 that said most of the BC grow operations were being run by gangs, and one of those gangs was the Hells Angels. They had 8 chapters in BC alone. But the Operation BC was different from anything we'd seen before. They weren't just sending cannabis south. they were trading it for other narcotics. Cannabis trucks would hit in the United States, the same vehicles would come back loaded up. It was basically a barter system. Trading cannabis for other drugs meant they didn't have to move cash across the border, which is way easier to detect. The Hells Angels had chapters on both sides of the border, so they were positioned perfectly to control both ends of the deal. Alright, now I have to talk about Marc Emery. After all, he was the public face of cannabis in Canada for over 20 years. Emery moved to Vancouver in 1994 and started selling cannabis seeds out of his store, completely in the open. He paid Canadian taxes on his seed sales. From 1998 to 2005, he paid almost $600,000 in taxes as a declared marijuana seed vendor. Then, in 2005, Canadian police arrested him on a DEA request. The Americans wanted him extradited because some of his seeds had been used in the United States. He ended up serving 4 years in the U.S. prison. The DEA director said the arrest was, quote, a significant blow to the marijuana legalization movement. That's the DEA admitting they were going after him for political reasons. Then, in October 2018, Canada legalized cannabis nationwide. 2 decades of BC bud history just kind of ended overnight. And the original creator, the Indian, the guy who started it all on that island near Seattle, he's never come forward. If he's still alive, he's somewhere in his 80s. The breeder who built the foundation of a billion-dollar industry stayed silent the whole time. That's the story of BC Bud. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more cannabis history content. I drop new videos every week on the strains, the people, and the stories that shape this whole industry. And if you want to go deeper, check out my book, Cannabis Lore. I cover BC Bud and a bunch of other stories in a lot more detail. The link's in the description. Catch you on the next one.